Railway Conversations with Doc Frank. This is Steve Allday.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Today's episode is the first of two parts covering a recent live discussion about high-speed rail in Australia. My main guest is Stephen Allday from Sydney in Australia, who I already had on my show twice before. Steve has recently become increasingly optimistic about the prospects of high-speed rail in Australia, whereas I have had a more skeptical view, particularly with regards to value for money. This debate, which also includes some comments from the audience, shows that it is still possible to debate different viewpoints as long as the discussion is based on mutual respect. And I hope it can contribute to further discussion within the industry, which is more uniting than divisive. This podcast is not sponsored by third parties, which means uninterrupted listening to the episodes for you, and I hope you appreciate and enjoy that. If you want to support the show to keep it going, there are two ways you can do it. One is the typical request for podcast: subscribe and share with your friends. The other one is specific to the show and myself. I host a training portal with arguably the world's most comprehensive course offer on digital signaling technologies and everything to do with high capacity. Some of my trainings are one of a kind, which means unique in the world. For example, the high capacity signaling blueprint, the high capacity railway mindset training, or most recently, my course about digital signaling interoperability. All of those courses are online, so you can watch the lessons at times convenient for you and as often as you like. And there is an industry-leading Q&A support where I will answer your questions not just during your training, but at least for further 12 months after you completed your course. What you can do that would be really nice is checking out this training portal, which you find at docfranktraining.podia.com. That is docfranktraining.podia.com. And if you find that you or a coworker of you can benefit from any of those courses, I would be very happy to see you growing your knowledge, understanding, and confidence through any of my trainings. Thank you. But now, please do enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to this first live episode of the podcast Railway Conversations with Doc Frank. Doc Frank is me, your host. A special welcome to my guest, Stephen Allday from Sydney, the first person who made it 3 times on this podcast, except for myself, of course. And I brought Steve on to talk about a topic that is both very controversial and very much discussed here in Australia, and this is high-speed rail. We've had several feasibility studies on high-speed before. I was actively involved in one of those back in 1998-99 when there were tenders requested for a high-speed connection between Sydney and Canberra, which is the capital of Australia. And and high speed seems to be a topic that keeps coming up once every few years. And this time we seem to have a government with a prime minister who used to be a transport minister before in Australia, who seems to be very adamant to bring this whole topic to a head, bring it forward, and at least bring it to a decision whether or not high speed in Australia makes sense. So as a bit of background, there was a recent post on LinkedIn that Steve did, which to me looked quite optimistic towards high speed in Australia. And it triggered some of the more skeptical views that I'm known for on LinkedIn, at least. And I commented on it, and then Steve commented back, and we realized we do have quite a few similarities of views, but at the same time, we have quite a different judgment on certain other aspects. And we thought it would be good and for facilitating the entire discussion and hopefully bring both camps a little bit closer together, being less divisive, when we can just debate it in a respectful and friendly manner. And then I thought maybe it would be a good idea to give guests the opportunity to say something as well. ask questions from any of us or give comments. Steve, do you want to say something how it came to you writing this post, or a little bit of the background about it, maybe for starters?
Yep, quite happy to do that. I think I'll probably start off by saying, if you'd have asked me this question, we were having this debate maybe 10 years ago, or 2013, when the first report was commissioned and carried out, I would have probably had a very different position to what I've got today. I think, again, if you then asked me maybe in 2022, I'd probably be in the halfway house. So I was starting to move more towards definitely seeing a place for high-speed rail. I think at one point I was certainly 2022, I was more into the, yes, we could do a mix of high speed and mixing it in with the existing network. But now I think time has moved on. And I think I definitely see a role for high speed rail. I think we've got to understand that this is a long-term objective. This is not something that's intended to be built in a very few years. I think the intent is that we can get some quick wins, which is why the government and the agency is looking at initially the Sydney to Newcastle alignment first, but at the same time, obviously developing the business case for not just that, but all of the other regions, and then obviously for a longer term high-speed rail network. One of the reasons why I probably have the position that I've got is I actually travel on that particular line between Newcastle and Sydney, and I think, and I'll put it out to people later on to have some comments and views, but regardless, my viewpoint would be, regardless of whether you want high-speed rail or whether you don't want high-speed rail, on that route, doing nothing is simply not an option. It's just simply not an option anymore. And I can see the benefits of actually where high-speed rail working as an integrated transport, part of an integrated transport network, has very much a role to play at the regional level, and then latterly getting wider. So that's a little bit about why I wrote what I did, and why I've got the position that I've got. And it doesn't mean I'm right and everybody's wrong, but that's my view.
Yeah. Well, I have been on record for a few years now, since I did a conference presentation presenting what I think are three main pillars of land transport in Australia, or rail land transport in Australia. Pillar number one is inside the cities, which is something that I have summarized or labeled as metros. And I mean, the only real metro we have in Australia is, of course, Sydney Metro, but the rail system, the suburban rail system in Melbourne, is at least called metro. And in all the other cities, we have something similar. We have suburban rail systems that are meant to carry many more people in the future. So they are slowly but surely becoming high capacity systems. And that's what I would call either metro or high capacity suburban. Then the next thing I said, the second pillar, is a connection between the big cities and regional centers around it. So Sydney to Newcastle would be a prime example for something that I would call personally regional fast rail. And other parts in the world are calling this regional fast rail as well. So it's basically having a faster rail connection. And I defined the speed being somewhere between 150 and 250 kilometers per hour, which is already very fast in relation to any other form of rail transport we have in Australia at the moment. And the idea is to basically have the main cities growing by connecting them better to centers that are sitting around the cities. So for Sydney, for example, that would be something like Newcastle in the north, Wollongong in the south, and to some extent, probably that's the edge of the reach, Canberra in the southwest. For Melbourne, it would be cities like Geelong, Bendigo, Ballarat, maybe Shepparton, and Traralgon in the southeast. For Perth, it could be something like Bunbury. For Brisbane, it's probably most notably the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast, maybe Ipswich. So basically all the major cities in Australia, at least the big four, have some kind of regional centers which are in a sensible distance away, up to 200 kilometers, which would allow, or which would benefit, I think, greatly from faster and more efficient rail connection. And Steve, you just said this, exactly that point for Sydney to Newcastle, which in the current state is just a disaster. And the third pillar then would be very high speed, what I call it very high speed, which connects really the city centers with each other. And it could be either with a direct dedicated connection, or it could be connecting some regional centers sitting in between those major cities. So two different options to create a corridor like this. And my point back at the time was that in terms of economic viability, in terms of bang for your buck, as they say here in Australia, it's really a preference list. You probably get the most out of your investment for metro or for anything you do in the major cities. The next best thing is regional fast rail. And for high speed, at least here in Australia, in the current circumstances, you probably get the least out of your investment. So my point was, or my conclusion was there, that I'm not against the acceleration of rail connections, but whether Sydney to Melbourne and Sydney to Brisbane are the best possible connections, I would strongly doubt that. And I think that connections like Sydney to Newcastle would have much, much more benefit for much less investment. So that's where my position is. And to be honest, that hasn't really changed over the years because I didn't see the necessity to change it. If anything, I saw confirmation of this coming from the outside.
Yeah, I think in some respects, Frank, we aren't millions of miles apart, because if you actually look at what the government is asking for at this moment in time, particularly with the Newcastle to Sydney, they're talking of 250, which we classify as fast rail effectively. That doesn't mean to say that they might not want something in the future. And as I said, don't forget, this is a 40-year look forward in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And without a shadow of a doubt, I think that this time round, I think they've thought it through a lot better, and I think they've got that plan. So you do need to look at your regions first, your regional growth, which is absolutely critical, and then from that, then start to join the dots, if you like later on, and you could also look at what that might look like from a speed perspective. I wouldn't disagree with you in terms of metros. I think clearly you've only got to look at what's happening in Sydney. The uplift of just the northwest alone is incredible, and when you add on the city section, which will be later this year, you really start to see the benefits of that connectivity within the inner Sydney areas. But then, if you look at, as I said, one of the reasons why I think it's quite good to look at Newcastle to Sydney first, to be quite honest, if the very fact that you can get in a car at the same time as you can get on a train, and the car can absolutely murder you to get into the city, is outrageous. And this day and age is absolutely outrageous. It's something like 2 hours 40 minutes, 2 hours 38 minutes, something like that, from Newcastle to Sydney. That's simply not good enough. And it's not Sydney Trains' fault or New South Wales Trains' fault. It's simply that the network has got it's got no more capacity. And I think, and I know Michael's here, but if you look at the UK as an example, the biggest driver of a high speed rail wasn't to go absolutely as fast as you can. And I think that's one of the things that they probably did, because I think they probably got the specification over specified. It's about the problem the UK's got is literally capacity. And that's exactly what we're facing at this moment in time with those big cities and all those outer suburban cities, if you want for a better word, that really need better connectivity, because with that will come growth.
Yeah, I mean, I never said that we are miles apart. And one of my big hopes, which I have documented on LinkedIn various times since the new high-speed rail authority was founded, that I really hope that there is more common sense coming into this whole high-speed discussion now, and more rigor in really identifying whether it makes economic sense or whether it doesn't. And then hopefully coming to a situation where we don't have to redo another feasibility study in 5 years, because people in 5 years may not have been happy with what came out in 2024. And Sydney to Newcastle was previously not seen as a high-speed project. Sydney to Newcastle, from the view of the federal government, was previously in a faster rail authority. So there was previously an authority called something like National Faster Rail Authority or something like this, NFRA or so. And this has now been transferred into the new high-speed rail authority, probably because they wanted to coordinate the efforts and basically didn't water down the resources of experts across too many different authorities. But to me, Sydney to Newcastle is still predominantly what I would call regional fast rail, or what would fit into those regional fast rail category, while at the same time, I admit that could become the starting point for a high-speed connection between Sydney and Brisbane. So that to me makes it double attractive, because one is you need to do something for the connection of those regional centers. And secondly, you are not giving up on the potential long-term vision of a real high-speed corridor all the way from Melbourne to Sydney to Brisbane. So that's my big hope for this high-speed authority. Yeah.
So I think you're right that if you look, the faster rails all got pulled back into what is now the High Speed Rail Authority, and I think it is to look at that bigger picture from an Australia-wide perspective and be able to give that focus from both a regional and then a broader viewpoint. And obviously, you know, the work that they're going to do this year, I think it's hard. They've got a lot of work to do in a very small space of time. I do believe they will do it. I genuinely believe will do it. And I believe that there is the true intent that we will migrate from that with successful business case initially, shall we say, for the Newcastle to Sydney element. And that then goes into some form of construction or design and construct. That would be my desire, and I think would be my wish. I think, and again, I'll come back to that, because I think it's quite important to look at that Newcastle to Sydney as an example, because I think, and again, they've still got some work to do in terms of the alignment. I know there's a lot of work that they can grab from what was done in 2013, and indeed what was done as part of the 2023, I think, report that came out from the Faster Rail in terms of New South Wales. And I think, you know, what you've got to try and do is get that connectivity whilst at the same time ease the congestion that you've currently got on that present network. So, I mean, one of the things, Frank, and this is more close to your heart, I know, because, you know, you could always look at using CBTC and digital signaling systems to be able to get more out of the same network. But in all honesty, that would be just such a minute improvement on that route that it wouldn't fix anything for very long at all. And not only that, don't forget you've got freight on there, so you do need to be able to I think separate out the two, have them touching at certain points where they need to, so you can get people off the existing network onto the new network with the right touch points, because the benefits would be not only for those people that are going those longer distances, but for the people who aren't going those longer distances. They will suddenly get a better service themselves, and we will also be able to open up freight, which, you know, again, it's an important issue. You know, freight in this country, you've got to move that stuff. I see that's where all the benefits are coming from.
Yes, just to pick up your comment about my preference for signaling, I've been on record to say that high capacity signaling is the cheapest and most cost efficient way to improve the capacity of the railway. But this comes with the caveat that the railway needs to be suitable for that. And most people will have heard the saying, "You can't polish a turd." And I think when it comes to the Sydney to Newcastle connection, that corridor has so severe problems that with high capacity signaling, you probably could improve the capacity on that corridor, but not to the extent that you would expect from what you can get for operations that are really suitable for high capacity signaling. For example, Sydney Metro. So, and I had this question before in Sydney where somebody said, well, are you saying you can put CBTC on the North Shore line and you can get 30 trains per hour? I said, oh my God, no. Yeah, because the corridor just doesn't give this. It doesn't give the capability of, I mean, what's the point of having trains traveling closer together and faster? And then they go around the curve and they hit the rock wall, which is right next to the tracks. Yeah. So you can still go only like, I don't know, with 30, 40 kilometers per hour there because the corridor is just not suitable. And the current Sydney to Newcastle corridor is absolutely quite bad as well. Interestingly, especially with Sydney to Newcastle, there are still people with a bit of historical knowledge saying there used to be a much faster rail connection between those two cities in the past on the same corridor. And this is really something where I said, well, what happened there? What has gone wrong that on the same rail corridor, on the same tracks, despite of all the technological progress and, I don't know, better sleepers and better temping systems, better track maintenance, all this kind of stuff, that rail transport on that corridor between those two cities today is slower than it was in the past. This is something I think that very few people will ever understand because it just doesn't make any sense. Or do you have an idea why that is?
Steve? Personally, and I think I welcome other people to say. Personally, I think it's pure congestion. If you look at the amount of pathways that are having to be facilitated now and put in freight as well, then very quickly you can see why it's slowed down. And that's why I think you've got to this point now where you've got to have that sea change, if you like, and that's why there is definitely a pathway, and we can argue around the semantics of whether we call it fast rail or whether we call it high speed rail or whether it ultimately becomes from fast to high speed rail. What we have got to do is get that circa 250k as a minimum, I think, at this moment in time between those two cities, touching at somewhere like, I mean, you may even want to go into Parramatta, you may want to go into the Central Coast somewhere. I'm not going to second guess. I've got my own views, but either way, what you will do is migrate people off of the existing network, touch base with the metro at key points, as well as Sydney trains and the New South Wales train link, and you start to do that, and you'll see that step change, not just for the people going the longer distance, but the step change for those that have chosen to live closer to the city, and also might, as I say, get that freight up.
Yeah, I believe it is important to either define different levels of high speed, or at least explain what you mean in the particular instance. And this is for the following reason. A lot of people compare, or a lot of people have a certain impression of what, or a certain understanding of what high speed means to them. So they think about something like the new high-speed lines in China where trains travel at 350 kilometers per hour, or they think about the Shinkansen in Japan, which travels at similar speeds, or the ice train in Germany, which also goes like 330 or something like that. So when you come up with high-speed Sydney to Newcastle, a lot of people will automatically, by hearing the words high-speed, expect train speeds of 330, 350, or hey, we are now 10 years further, let's make it 380, which is completely delusional. So unless, and the other thing is, if you say that Sydney to Newcastle is meant to do only 250, there will immediately be people say, oh, well, this is rubbish. Why can't we go 300, 350, 400, what have you? So what's missing here, and I think this is something that's really on the homework list, I believe personally, on the homework list for the High-Speed Rail Authority, is some kind of study or an explanation available to the public in understandable terms why the selected speed range for Sydney Newcastle is only 250. And there are reasons for that, because if you want to create a high-speed railway for, say, 350, you need to put a lot more effort into creating this rail corridor. The quality of the track needs to be so much higher, and it will be so much more expensive. And then you look at the additional benefits from the reduction of journey time that you gain by having a peak speed of 350 or 300 compared to 250. And it will probably turn out that it's something like 2 minutes, 30 seconds or something like that. Because for most of the journey, a train will never achieve speeds of higher than 250 kilometers per hour. But these things, you understand this. I understand this. Some of the other experts in the room understand it, but most of the public will not understand it. They will just say, this is worse than what Japan does, and France and Italy and Germany and South Korea and China and pretty much everybody. So it's like a high-speed system, a second order inferior high-speed system, where I'm saying, no, wait a minute. It's not an inferior high-speed system. It's a very sophisticated regional fast rail system, because 250 for regional fast rail is pretty damn fast. That's about as fast as it gets in my definition anyway.
And I think the important thing, I mean, you made some comparisons there, and I think it's important to understand that you can't say that the challenges of Europe are the same as the challenges in Asia, that are the same as the challenges in the UK, which is or the same in the US, and indeed the challenges of Australia. They are different, and it doesn't mean because one does something that the other one needs it or should do it. Quite the reverse. I mean, we've got our own particular challenges, which we've touched on, and I think you're right. If you are going to get, you get down to an hour-ish from Newcastle to Sydney, people will be pleased with that, and that will, it will deliver on what it's meant to do. But bearing in mind, if you look at our population, and I know people talk about, we don't have the population, which is very true. We don't have huge population. Having said that, it's 26 million, and in New South Wales alone, in the last from June 22 to June 23, in New South Wales alone, it increased by 170,000 people. So, 2% year on year growth, and people are going to go to the regions, and we've got to accommodate that, and we've got to facilitate that and help that regional growth. And that's what the drive is all about. It's not about trying to get from A to B. I don't know. I'm going to be cheeky, and Michael, I am going to ask you, because I mean, am I right in saying that some of the things in HS2, particularly the North, that that their focus was on the wrong thing? I think. Fast rather than facilitating, better capacity.
You're absolutely right. I mean, HS2 was sold in the UK at high speed rail. You've got to remember the UK is slightly different. We were still in the European Union when HS2 was conceived, and there was a view that HS2 would connect to HS1 and you'd go into Europe that way. Well, of course, that's never happened. The first thing that was cut out of the HS2 budget was the link to HS2 at St Pancras. But the big thing now is connectivity. It's huge problems with connectivity. There's little point in building London to Birmingham. There are already two perfectly good railways there. What you do need is to go on to Manchester. And also in the UK, we have Bradford, which is the 8th biggest city in the UK, has never had a through station, ever. It's got two terminals, never had and the obvious thing is go Manchester, Bradford, Leeds. So Steve's absolutely right. It's about connectivity. And the idea of being able to go Sydney, Newcastle in an hour, or London, Birmingham in an hour, or more especially London, Manchester in an hour and a half or an hour and three quarters is extremely attractive. And it's also forming part now of the government's Levelling Up campaign. It's to do with levelling up and connectivity, not with speed. I mean, and Frank, you're absolutely correct when you talked about the difference in time through 250 kilometres an hour or 300. It's minuscule effect what you actually achieve at the end. Because the problem, as long as you've got terminal stations at both ends, you've got to start and stop. And that in itself reduces the increase in journey times you're going to get. But I'd echo Steve's points completely that this is about connectivity. High-speed connectivity, but not the ultra-high speed that HS2 in the UK was planned for and was always undeliverable.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was one thing, actually. Thanks, Michael. That was one thing that struck me always when I looked a little bit deeper into high-speed 2 in the UK. The ambition to run 350 kilometers per hour, which for commercial high-speed rail traffic is close to a world record. I'm not aware of any commercial high-speed line in the world traveling faster than 350. And to me, that comes back to this, whether you call it vanity or whether you call it keeping up with the Joneses, that you put out there this ambition to be the best in the world. And by doing so, potentially compromising the entire idea of the project. So what I would dare saying, without knowing any details, Michael, you know this much better than I because of your work on high speed. But what I would dare saying is, if they reduce the target speed for London Birmingham for high speed 2, the first stage, from 350 to 250, the savings on the rail corridor would probably be or possibly be so substantial that could finance the next stage, say Birmingham to Manchester or something like that. But we stick, or people, not we, but people stick to this ideal. It's got to be 350. It's got to be world class, whatever the definition of world class is, no matter what the costs are, and no matter whether we really need this, other than for saying, hey, we are the best in the world.
May I come back on that, Frank? I mean, firstly, I'm sorry to labour the HS2 was conceived in the UK in 2009 as a major national infrastructure project to lift the morale of the nation after the global financial crisis. That's why it was done. It was basically, the original proposal was an ego trip. Absolutely. And we started to talk about 350 kilometres an hour. I know that SNCF told the Department of Transport in London in 2012, you must be mad. We would never even try this generally with TGV in France because it's horrendously. The problem is not the capital. The capital costs are bad enough, Frank, but the maintenance costs are horrendous. And what SNCF told the Department of Transport, if you do it at that, you'll find all your maintenance resources get sucked out of your conventional network. And you may have a super duper high speed network, but your conventional network will fall apart. The other thing is, eventually with HS2, the cost finished up at 100. When it was cancelled on the 4th of October last year, the cost for even the truncated network had risen to £182.1 billion from an original proposal of 33. All right, you've got to allow for inflation, but it shows you what the vanity of speed can do. It's absolutely crazy.
And there's one other point that you just brought up, Michael, completely correctly, by the way. The Department of Transport asks basically high-speed experts from France, from SNCF, about their views on high speed. And they say, well, I wouldn't, and I'm the expert, I wouldn't do 350. You must be mad. That's your words, not mine. And still they want to do it. So that takes me to the point, where do the authorities that make the decisions for those high-speed lines, where do they get the advice from? From where do they accept advice? And how good is this advice really? And I think that's a very, very important question here in Australia as well, because what I have suspected for a long time, that some people here in this country who are the strongest proponents of high speed, they have an agenda. They have a personal target because, for example, they want to sell high-speed rolling stock. So all the high-speed rolling stock suppliers are all over this, and yeah, we need to do it now, and the time for this is now. And can you please sign the contract here for buying the first 50 high-speed trains from us, not from anybody else? And or maybe some consultants who think they can build themselves a foundation for consulting contracts for the next 25 years. And actually, when I thought about how to set up, how to plan the session, one of the tongue-in-cheek questions I wanted to ask Steve is, what's your agenda, mate? Why are you so optimistic all of a sudden? Do you want to get a consulting gig for the next 20 years on high speed in Australia, or what's the real background? And of course, not that I would really suspect this from you, but the question, I think, generally is legitimate for somebody who has a very strong view on something like this, and maybe not often with the best arguments. What's behind this? Why are you doing this? Why are you pushing this so hard, or why are you pushing so hard against it?
I'll answer that one, Frank, if you like. So the answer is no,
Sure.
because at the end of the day, I enjoy building things rather than talking about building things. So I could assure you, I don't want to spend another 2 or 3 years talking about things. I actually want to make the case. I want the case to be made, and we actually get in there and we start to build, because I think there's a real case to be made for it, and there's real benefits. And I think you froze then for a second, Frank. But no, I'm not wearing a consultancy hat. Quite the reverse.
I agree with you. I mean, I would never in my life say we should stop rail investment in Australia. Not for my life. So I never said it. I never will, because I'm part of the industry as well. And even though I may not be involved in the actual construction project, I want to see rail in Australia develop and growing and coming forward and improving and all this kind of stuff. The question, though, is what's the best thing to spend the money for? Because money doesn't grow on trees. And if I think about any change of circumstance over the last 5 years, what comes to mind predominantly is COVID and the effects of COVID, which means a lot more economic pressure on the government to not spend money everywhere at the same time. So you worked before on transport projects, which were arguably very, very beneficial for the respective regions. Just 2 examples. You worked on Sydney Metro for many, many years. And you also, before that, you worked on Canberra Light Rail. And I think both these transport projects have been real game changers for the respective communities. But there are additional plans to grow these networks, right? So there are plans for building more lines for Sydney Metro in Sydney, and everybody will say, yeah, Sydney really needs that. And at the same time, Canberra is trying to expand the light rail network with the same rationale that the city needs that, the community needs that, and everything. So just imagine now that somebody tells you there won't be any investment, at least not any federal funding, in Sydney Metro for the next 40 years. And there won't be any investment into Canberra Light Rail in the next 40 years. Forget about Metronet in Perth. Forget about anything to do with Brisbane, no matter whether they got the Olympics or not. And all of that because our entire funding from a federal perspective goes into this white elephant building a high-speed line from Melbourne to Brisbane. How would you feel about that?
But that isn't what they're saying at this moment, though, Frank, is it? I mean, what they're not saying we're going to go Melbourne to Sydney straight away. They're looking at it, which is, again, coming back to where we started. They're looking at it from regional perspective first, and the gains from a regional perspective. We don't have to keep going through them. They're painfully obvious what they are. And you mentioned COVID. One of the things that COVID did was migrate people more away from the office because they didn't need to come into the city, and they quite like that lifestyle. I've been doing it ever since I came here. But it's there are benefits. There are the local benefits that you've got to do, because if you don't do these things, and that, as I said, that's the immediate one, if you like, and there's Newcastle to Sydney is just one example. You've got each region's got its own, which they will look at them, and if you don't do, and you said no, we're not going to spend the money on that. Do you know what the alternative will be? You have more and more people on the roads, because there's absolutely nothing at this moment in time to encourage people from the road onto rail, and we should be encouraging that, because we talk about having a green agenda and a better environmental agenda. Well, if we do nothing, then don't be surprised if people continue to buy more cars and drive into the city. It's wrong. It's just wrong.
Yeah. I think, again, that needs to be put into perspective. That needs to be documented and also publicized in a way that the normal public understands this. Because at the moment, when we talk about high speed in Australia, everybody's understanding is Melbourne to Brisbane. Everybody's understanding. And then you say, yeah, but our first priority is Sydney to Newcastle. And everybody just hears, okay, the first priority, but after that, we're doing this and this and this. And at the end of the day, we expect to have something from Melbourne to Brisbane via Sydney. And this is the real deal. This is what everybody has in their heads. And I don't know how you see it, but I wouldn't think you have a completely different opinion there. So what you have been saying is that something in the regional areas is necessary and urgent, everything. 100% agree. I 100% agree. But at the same time, I think we need to just manage the expectations there. Not so much we as the consultants or the YouTubers or LinkedIn influencers, what have you, but the people who are in charge, the people of being responsible for high-speed rail, like the new authority and the government that is being advised by this authority, they need to get the narrative right. They need to say, well, look, Melbourne, Brisbane, this is like, I don't know, a 40-year exercise. And by the way, it may turn out that it's not really commercial viable, that we don't get the patronage, not even with the population growth coming over the next 20, 30, 40 years. So the final verdict there is not made. But if you can't get Sydney to Newcastle to work economically, you will have no shot whatsoever to get Melbourne to Brisbane work. And if you can't build a decent rail connection between Sydney and Canberra, what are the chances of building a viable rail connection between Canberra and Melbourne? Zero, yep. Right? This narrative needs to be set straight, I believe. Yeah, and there's a lot of guesswork at the moment, and people what people keep having in their heads is the comparison with other countries that are not really comparative. They say, well, high speed is everywhere in Europe. It's a network, and here and all the cities are connected. And I don't know, 37 cities in Germany have a high speed connection. And in Australia, we talk about 3 cities and we already struggle. Yeah. So it's this like keeping up with the Joneses, like, everybody is better than us. And therefore, we need to build something really fantastic. So, yeah, just to keep up.
Yeah, well, I think to respond back, I think the rail authority, the high speed rail authority, they haven't been around very long, and they've certainly in the very few weeks of getting the CEO on board, they've started to make some progress already. And I think you're seeing from what's coming out in the market how they're framing it in terms of initially for the regional growth, in terms of certainly the Newcastle to Sydney, and the others will, because they're going to look at those at the same time. They will put in place a plan. That's the intent in this next year. And then, yes, eventually there will be that longer term view of what do we want from a high speed rail network. And to be honest, do we necessarily need to compete with airlines? Because the size of Australia, we probably would always struggle to compete and justify. But it doesn't mean to say we shouldn't have something. You've got to do that. You've got to build that business case up for. But the immediate one, I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that you cannot make a case for Newcastle to Sydney, and likewise in the other regions as well. Absolutely, you can.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, and in terms of capacity, as I said to you, if you look at that, when I travel on it now, it's absolutely chocker. The standing room only, and on a train that takes forever. I only go half the distance. I only go 70 or 80 kilometers, and I'm on the train for an hour and a half. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Yes.
And it's not New South Wales fault. It's the capacity. We've got capacity issues, and that's what the higher speed rail will do.
Yeah, but I think, yes, it's right. It's a capacity issue, and there's another parallel, I think, with high speed 2 in the UK, where I believe the main rationale, and Steve, you mentioned that before, the main rationale for the London-Birmingham connection is not the higher speed, it is the additional capacity by creating an additional corridor. But you heard the person sitting in the UK saying, I'm not sure whether that was really needed. But that's a different story. It definitely will be needed on the Sydney to Newcastle corridor. But that brings me to the next thing. If the current network is too congested to enable enough capacity for carrying the traffic that's required on that line, To me, that means that a high-speed corridor or a fast-speed corridor, let's call it from Sydney to Newcastle, has to be a new dedicated railway corridor, which is separated from the existing one. We agree on that?
Yep, we do. Yep.
Cool.
And indeed, if you look at what the rail authority is saying, they're saying that.
Yes. So the next thing I think which is needed here, and again, maybe there's the thinking in the authority is already going in this direction. We need to refine the scope. That doesn't mean we have to finalize the scope. It just means we need a stake in the sand, which is a little bit more precise than just Sydney to Newcastle. Because there are many places in Newcastle where you could terminate a service like this. And mind you, Sydney is slightly bigger than Newcastle. So there are many, many more options in Sydney where you could possibly terminate such a service. So the question really is, how do I get into the city? And in Sydney, it's arguably the bigger problem compared to Newcastle, simply because of the higher density, and there's already more infrastructure there. So that needs to be solved. So there needs to be at least a stake in the ground where we say, okay, our initial assumption is a terminus in Sydney there. Whatever there is. It could be Central, it could be Hornsby, it could be whatever. And once you've got the stake in the ground, then you can start having a decent discussion whether this proposal is good or whether it's complete nonsense or whether there are other proposals that may be better. The reason why I'm bringing this up, because I think it's so really, really important. And we have just seen a case study in Australia where I think they got it horribly wrong. And that's Inland Rail. Like everybody in Australia knows Inland Rail is a freight connection from Melbourne to Brisbane. Beautiful. But nobody was clear from where in Melbourne to where in Brisbane or where near Brisbane. The idea was never to go into Brisbane, let alone going to the port of Brisbane. But where else do you stop this? It's not clear. Until today, it is not clear. So you've been working on a railway project for many years without even understanding how the line looks like and which two concrete points this railway line really connects. And I see, at least as a threat, exactly the same problem happening with high speed. And let's just take Sydney Newcastle, because I would think that the planning for Sydney Newcastle should be much more advanced than for all the other stuff. Because Sydney to Newcastle was previously planned by the National Faster Rail Authority. So there has been a lot of thought gone into this already. But I, for example, as a member of the public with an interest in rail, I've got no idea what this is. So in terms of publication of those findings, I think there's a huge gap at the moment. So that's me being on the bandwagon.
That's all right.
Over to you.
That's fine. And to answer your question, there is quite a bit of work being done in the past, and they're going to make use of that. They will determine where the position will be in Sydney. That will come out a part of this. And I will name somebody who I know is listening in on this at this moment in time. Requirements is everything, isn't it, James? So James Tomlinson is a very good friend of mine. He does requirements management, and as part and parcel of getting this business case right, they will determine what is the business requirements, what are the requirements, what are we looking to deliver, and then from that you will start to build your business case up. Then you also look at your options in terms of how you deliver on that, and from that you then compare it against the benefits that come with it. You mentioned finances. There are many different financial models as well. So it's not just a matter of when paying for it now. There are many different models that they could look at. To answer your question is they absolutely are tackling this. From what I've seen, everything I've seen, they are going to define and determine what the requirements are that they want, and from that you then start to build your business case and you start to make the case for it.
Yeah. So let's just go quickly back to the magic trick that you just pulled out of the cylinder. You mentioned a name. Suddenly a face appeared on the screen that I haven't seen before in that Zoom call. and then it disappeared again. So James, it's
Oh,
your stage now. Just tell the audience who you are, what your role is in this whole shebang, and give us a little bit of your views after all this discussion that we just had, please.
That's very kind of you. I had intended just to listen in. My name is James Tomlinson. I've been the Program Requirements Manager at Sydney Metro for about 10 years or so. But prior to that, I worked for Network Rail in the UK. And one of the comments that I was going to make earlier on, and it's particularly relevant to the infrastructure in the UK, when I was working for on the West Coast Main Line, the infrastructure that currently exists between London and Birmingham, as an example, we were then, at that point, we were pushing high-speed, what we considered high-speed rail based on near-to-near level 3, and we were hoping for 140 miles per hour. That's what the requirement said. And you may be aware that we didn't achieve that. And the reason we didn't achieve that was because of the infrastructure around the railway line. And that's, I think, one of the key issues that we face in all big cities. And somebody just put a map of China in the chat, and the high-speed rail that exists in China, which is an incredible service. I've been on a few of them. It is a fundamentally different proposition, though, because, of course, in China, there's nothing stopping you building the rail. What I mean by that is the government simply acquires the land without any query, without any issue. That's not the case in the UK, and it's certainly not the case in Australia. And I think when we look at the value proposition, I like the idea of it being this regional case, and I have a feeling Steve is doing that for a reason, because he doesn't want to get on that train again. But when we talk about that regional case, we need to be thinking in terms of, I guess, what is feasible in terms of the alignment. You're right that we should pick an endpoint. I mean, that's a good place to start, and there is an awful lot of work, I think, that's gone into that. I don't think it's as critical as perhaps you do, but that alignment is just such a question mark. It's obviously where you would start. It's something that I would very much like to see develop. I'm unlikely to, because as I say, I'm Sydney Metro.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Thank you.
Listen,
Thanks.
you so much
I thought you would be. I thought you would be possibly part of this high-speed rail authority. That would be very interesting if somebody from that organization was on the call.
Behind me. This is what we've been building 10 years
now. But let me just pick this up because you've got Central Station behind you. So if you want to compare journey times between rail and other modes of transport, and I'm talking predominantly Sydney to Melbourne at the moment, because there's a lot has been talked about that. People come up with journey comparisons, which on the one hand are taken apparently with a stopwatch on the worst possible day, like Melbourne to Sydney in 4.5 hours. And then on the other hand, you've got best case guessworks. It's like, by rail, we can do this under 4, door to door. On what basis, if you don't even know where the railway line starts and where the railway line ends? That's complete rubbish. So first and foremost, as a railway person, if you think about Melbourne to Sydney, you're thinking about Southern Cross to Central in Sydney, right? But in Central, we just had a major exercise to add an additional platform for Sydney Metro. We had to go underground. And if we now want to add an additional terminal for a high speed, not just a terminal, we are talking about a through station, because in the future, we want to keep going to Brisbane, right? So we're not just going south to Melbourne, we also want to go north to Brisbane. So it has to be a terminal station, maybe for starters, with the vision of continuing making it a through station to keep going north. Where anywhere near Central should we want to put this? And James probably knows better than anybody else, because he was involved in the planning for Sydney Metro, where they needed to put the metro station, how deep they needed to go, how many obstacles are in the way underground, like buried services and stuff like that. So what are the chances to have Central in Sydney as an additional stopping point for high speed? I think it's very remote, but that's what most people.
Steve, and I'll let you talk. There's a couple of ghost platforms at Central that were previously a tourist attraction, and we're now using them for utilities, Sydney Metro, that is. It's almost a shame that we didn't. Steve's nodding his head. Do you want to talk about this because you were involved in that?
No, you answered the question anyway, because you were saying in the background there are a couple of ghost platforms down there as well that could well come into play at some point. We didn't use them as we should have done, but that's a separate issue. But that's not beyond the wit of man to resolve what we did do, and I know what we did do on Sydney Metro. You can't second guess that it will go there. Frank, but I think that it will go there. I mean, the logic is to make it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a through station. It doesn't, because if you look at a lot of the northern trains at the moment, they come in and they terminate and they go back out in a different direction to the south. So,
well, we just had a message popping up from the chat where somebody asked a very legitimate question: why does it have to be central? Why can't it be? And then there was a number of other suggestions popping up. I think Parramatta was in there. I saw WSA, which is Western Sydney Airport. So, but this is exactly why I'm saying we've got to have this discussion, or we meaning the High Speed Rail Authority. They have to have the discussion where this line will go to, and why this line doesn't terminate anywhere else. Because in the same way, you have to justify the decision, okay, it will be central, but at the same time, you need to address questions from the public. Why can't it be Western Sydney Airport? Why can't it be Parramatta? Why can't it be Hornsby? Why can't it be Gosford? Yeah, why? So all of these things. And the same, absolutely the same applies in Melbourne as well. So we need a discussion at both ends. And even in smaller cities, even in Newcastle, the question needs to be asked: will it be a couple of spare platforms in Newcastle, whatever the name of the terminal is, or will it be something in the outskirts, maybe Broadmeadow? What will it be? Because this is paramount for any travel time comparison you ever come up with. If somebody says, well, I live 5 minutes walking distance from Central Station, and this is where the high-speed train will leave, and suddenly it terminates in Western Sydney Airport, the discussion looks very, very different, and the journey time comparison looks very, very different for that person.
So one of the interesting, the encouraging thing is that we're actually having this conversation, because it is quite important. So you mentioned Broadmeadow as an example. Then the Broadmeadow's got to come into play because it naturally takes you off to the north. All of these things are things that they're looking at. So they haven't said it's going to central. I've seen a couple of 3 options. Somebody mentioned Parramatta. Parramatta's got to be connected somehow or other, because it's a very large growing city. And again, making a play on the fact that we're talking about, we all said, 250k is still damn pretty fast, and you can get 2 or 3. It's getting that connectivity along the corridor, sweeping up where you need to sweep up to take off the burden of what's already on that line, and I can assure you it will play out. And so nobody's saying not going to go to Parramatta. Nobody's saying going to Central. There are a number of options, and these are the things that they're going to do. This all comes back down to how do your requirement specification, which is all part and parcel of this next less than 12 months now. Get that sorted. Then you've got your business case.
Yeah, and it's important to also communicate this to the public, and it's important to make this subject of scrutiny. So I was actually, I'm relatively relaxed with my role in this conversation here at the moment. I thought I would get a lot more flack for my negative stance here, but if anything, I see people agreeing with me. I believe there will be some criticism or say questions. Why couldn't we do this? Why can't we do that? Why can't we do the other? But just imagine what the difference will be, both in the alignment of a railway line. I'm talking Sydney, Newcastle, both in the alignment of a railway line and also the journey times that you can achieve, whether you go from Central straight north, or whether you go from Central via Western Sydney Airport and Parramatta with 2 stops, and then you go north. And then people will still complain, why can't we stop in Hornsby? Why can't we stop in Gosford? Why can't we stop in whatever? So there needs to be a balance. And I think, Steve, we just seen this with Sydney Metro, with the whole discussion around Sydney Metro West, number of stations versus achievable journey times. where you need to find the right balance. You need to find a sweet spot, like what journey time, what do I want to achieve? And what are the compromises I need to make regarding the number of stops and the location of stops and the alignment, whether it goes around the corner or whether it goes straight and all this kind of stuff. That's important. The entire discussion is based on that.
And that's exactly what this first phase of work is all about, is actually doing the detail in terms of requirements on the Newcastle to Central bit, and also the rest of them as well in terms of longer term, what they're planning to do. But journey time is something that's important end to end. It will determine it will also determine to a certain degree the amount of connectivity, but you've got to get that connectivity right. And by the way, in terms of those that live at other places like Hornsby or where all of those that you talked about, at the end of the day, they will get benefit anyway, because suddenly they've no longer got that congested railway that they're traveling on and sharing with everybody else who's going further north. And people like Parramatta who probably go into the likes of Strathfield, and then but you once the trains come into Strathfield on an evening, I tell you, they absolutely pile up. And they can go, and they're all going north. So it's all about getting that connectivity right, getting the number, and then from that you will get that broader. Everybody will actually benefit. Everybody, both the people going over.
But the benefits, yes, but the benefits that people in Hornsby, for example, may get are probably not the benefits they may be expecting. So the benefits, you could argue, the benefits would look very different between getting your own high-speed rail station in Hornsby, as opposed to, are we taking a few passengers off the existing line? So you should have a less congested journey on the existing rail corridor, which is the North Shore line or the line via Epping or something like that. So it is, and there will be a lot of debate. And I think this debate is absolutely necessary and absolutely justified. What should not happen is what happened very often in the past, that the government or the authority commissions a study from probably one of the top 4 consultancies in the country, and then they present the results and they say, well, that's it. And this is based on the best potential analysis. And then you get to see a 10-page business case summary, which does not go into any detail about any of the other options. And then people start justifiably screaming and shouting, saying, this is rubbish. You completely ignored the entire west of Sydney. How can you do that? Or how can you not go to Parramatta? Well, you're just getting a new metro line, but then I need to change trains, blah, 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 blah. And all of that because of, I think, lack of transparency of the decision-making process, the criteria for it, and then saying, well, look, not everybody has to agree with the process and with the end result, but this is our thinking and this is why we made the decision. And yes, we looked at all those other options and decided according to objective criteria, this is worse than the case that we have come up with. This is so much missing in every major project in Australia. It's not funny.
I can't talk from history, though I have some opinions on it. But what I will say is, and I think what you're talking about is, a client who's very a passive client as opposed to an active, proactive client. And I think what you're seeing this time round, from everything you're seeing that's coming out to market, from some of the things that they're not throwing everything away that's been done previous to. They're taking that, they're reviewing that, and they're making some clear decisions, and they're driving it. So they're taking ownership of what this is going to look like. And again, I come back to it. The only person that can actually really drive what the outcome will be is a client that understands what he is trying to achieve, writes it down, has a set of requirements, flows them down into actual, this is what the size of the tunnel will be, and it will be driven by the train. This will be the type of train it will be. This will be the speed it goes at. This will be where the connectivity will be, etc., etc., etc. That's what you're seeing this time around. And from that's why I believe you'll see a much better outcome, both on this alignment plus the other alignments.
I hope so. And Steve, probably you will agree with me that the best leadership of initiatives like this is understanding where your knowledge gaps are and where your weaknesses are, and then basically get advice in that's really that's really useful. That's really, there's expertise behind it, and also having the courage to make yourself subject to scrutiny, make yourself subject to the skeptics or independent reviewers or whatever you want to call them, because it's just important. So I'm saying this because Michael, who's on the call here, was so nice to send us an article that he's written recently in one of the magazines in the UK. And one of the statements there, which caught my attention, couldn't believe my eyes, was that major rail infrastructure projects such as High Speed 2 were planned without the involvement of any operational experience. And this is at least something very different from what I've seen at Sydney Metro, where from the very first line, there was a shadow operator involved that basically took the place of an operating stakeholder. And the moment it was decided that MTR would take over operations of the first line, the shadow operator was replaced by them. So you, as much as possible, you had an operator sitting at the table. And the fact that this has allegedly not has happened in High Speed 2 in the UK is flabbergasting. And that, of course, raises a red flag. We need to have something like this for high speed. But at the moment, we don't have a high speed operator in Australia because we don't have high speed in Australia. So we probably need to do the same thing as Sydney Metro did back in the past, appointing a shadow operator with significant enough high speed experience for the mere purpose of saying, if we did build this high capacity or this high speed line, where should it be? Where should the stops be? How is this be operable? How is it be maintainable? Stuff like that. Yeah, we need this. And I think if there's one lesson learned, a big lesson learned from High Speed 2 in the UK, it would be this.
And Frank, all of those things are packages that are out to market at this moment in time, seeking those very skill sets.
Yeah, that's good. And that would have been one of my hopes when I saw that Tim Parker took over the chair at the High Speed Rail Authority with his previous experience from Sydney Metro. So he's been involved previously in how it works properly, especially with involvement of operators. So that's definitely a thing which is important to bring into the game. And I'm very relieved to hear that they're doing just that at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's why, you asked me right at the very beginning, why am I saying optimistic compared to previous two? It's because you're seeing all these things. They are learning from the past. And Michael, you've got your hand up, so I'm going to let you have your say.
The reason I put my hand up very simply, the phrase I've not heard used today is when you're doing this, you need an informed buyer. You do not have the consultants run it for you, because that's what's happened in the UK. And the irony is, in the UK, if you compare what happened in England with Transport Scotland, which delivers, all right, Scotland's a very small country, but for instance, Scotland delivers mainline electrification for a third of the cost of England because they have an informed purchaser in Bill Reaver who runs Transport Scotland. HS2 never had an informed buyer. It was run direct to the Treasury, direct to the DfT, and that's why you finish up with a difficult situation now, where we're now trying to squeeze the toothpaste back into the tube.
Yeah, and you're absolutely spot on, Michael. And I didn't use the word informed buyer, but when I said ownership, that's what I meant. A client that understands what he wants and has got enough. He doesn't have to have an army, but has enough skill sets to determine exactly, what the outcome will be. Not be led by consultants who. I'm not knocking consultants. I guess I'm one. I don't know. But you know what I mean? It's about making sure that you steer the direction towards what you want. Be open to challenge. There's nothing wrong with being challenged back, because that's always healthy. But to have a clear understanding that informed buyer, as you rightly said, and it's a term I've used previous to as well. Absolutely important.
And look, being a consultant myself, and so are you, Steve, it's nothing generally negative about consultants. I mean, even an informed buyer, in order to become an informed buyer, may have to engage consultants to help and to assist. And not all consultants are terrible, to say that much. But at the same time, an informed buyer also needs to have some means of assessing what the consultants put on their plates. So there needs to be some form of governance. There needs to be some form of independent review or peer review or whatever you want to call it. And the projects that I've seen in Australia, where I was lucky to be involved in Australia, that used such an independent peer review process, those are the projects that run relatively best. And I'm talking about Sydney Metro. I'm talking about the Metro Tunnel project in Melbourne. You can say about it what you want. It could be much, much worse. So it's actually still one of the better projects for sure. And I'm also talking Cross River Rail in Brisbane, who also had some kind of an independent review process at times. And in preparation of somebody attacking me for being too negative or too skeptic or something like that, this independent review role is exactly meant to provide this skepticism. You need to scrutinize the initial ideas. You can't just stop and say, "Oh, that's the first idea that doesn't look completely nonsensical, so let's go with this." And it needs to be scrutinized, and it needs to be explainable to people why you go for this option and not for all the other options. Because you will always have people now or in the future that will question your decision making, that will question the business case, that will question the entire project, especially if it runs into problems, and saying, well, why didn't you do this? I said from day one, had you gone to Western Sydney Airport instead of Central, you would have avoided all those problems, blah, 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 blah. And they may be right and they may be wrong, but the problem is you cannot prove why you made certain decisions and why you didn't make other decisions. That's the transparency thing again, I think.
And again, it all comes back to requirements and defining your requirements, Frank. So the minute you spend a lot of time defining what those requirements are, capturing them, and then flowing them through. So you have got that scrutiny, because you can look back and you can actually, I was going to say defend's the wrong word. You can actually demonstrate that, you thought about this and you didn't do this because. And there will always be the people that said, yeah, but I would have preferred this and I would have preferred that, and you're never going to please all of the people. I think what you've got to do is make sure that you understand what your objectives are and then plan how you get to that.
Yes, and it should be a logical connection between those objectives and the actual design decisions that you're making, and it should go without saying. So I agree with you on that, obviously. But we've seen examples, and we just talked about High Speed 2 in the UK at the moment, where I would argue that none of the real reasons why High Speed 2 is needed in the UK is related to a top speed of 350 kilometers per hour. None of that.
Yep.
Yeah. Other than we want to be the fastest railway in Europe because we're not even part of Europe anymore, but nonetheless, so it's basically vanity and keeping up with the Joneses. And I apologize to anyone in the UK if there may be other reasons for that, but if the main objectives are improving transport capacity between Birmingham and London, 350k is not what's needed there.
Yeah.
Right.
We have a hand up, Frank. Just to.
You. Hi, good to see you. You were hidden the whole time. So, what's your
Frank,
question or comment?
Yeah, thanks a lot to for organizing this interesting meeting. Yeah. As you know, I have been honored to participate in the Chinese high speed line development in 15 years ago. especially I participated in the beginning of its rapid development. So it's true in China. We did make a lot. Very big achievement. As you can see, I posted a picture in the chat box, and according to the current, actually that information already is from 2 years ago. Currently, it seems that the high-speed lines in China, the total length of high-speed line already over 45,000 kilometers in China. So, which including in China, actually we regarded the lines with the maximum speed over 200 kilometers per hour as high-speed line. And we have 200 kilometers per hour, 250 kilometers per hour, and also 350 per hour. Kilometers per hour. Why there is so different speed? Actually, below for the lines with maximum speed with over 200 and 250, we use the Chinese CTCS level 2, which is actually based on the ballast and track circuit. The solution is much similar with TVM 300 in France. So, so why in 2007, Chinese MOR decided to imported ETCS level 2. At that time, definitely ETCS level 2 specification already is existing in the world. It's developed by European, but actually, in China, it has been adopted rapidly. And in 2007, I still remember, when we decided to use that. In globally, there is no any reference experience application with the maximum 350 kilometers per hour. But we need, why? Because our first ETCS level 2 project is from Wuhan to Guangzhou, which the total length is nearly 1,000 kilometers. If I remember well, it's 980 kilometer that long. So for this kind of because it we want to use we need to establish a new line with more higher speed. If we still use 250 or 200, we can use Chinese CTCS level 2. So in 2007, just in several months, I think less than 6 months, Bombardier compete successfully with Siemens and Alstom to got the first ETCS level 2 project in China. And this project, the contract was signed in August of 2007. And then this line was delayed. It was open in the beginning of 2009. We only need less than 2 years. 1 year and a half. It's totally open.
That's pretty good going.
Why we because we believe ETCS level 2 solution is the best solution at that time. Because it's already valid, although it was not used in Europe with so higher speed, but this solution already tested and valid in Europe. Yeah, and the specification that is very detailed and mature. So
Yep.
yeah, we did. Yeah, in China, yeah, actually there is no so many consultant company. Yeah, frankly speaking. But frankly speaking, we a lot of experienced expert as the consultant organized by the client. Really made a big contribution. Yeah, to help the client understand how the specification is, how the specification works, and and to evaluate what kind of difficult we will face. We would face. Yeah, for example, we have to consider the track. Yeah, for example, China start to study and to build the long plastic track, because for high speed line, definitely we need this kind of track. Yeah, at that time, only German and Japan has had this kind of technology. Yeah, not just the signaling itself, but from the EMU, from the EMU tree, from the track, from different area, we have to support this kind of technology.
And I think you make some good points here, and I thank you for that, because I know Frank mentioned about consultants. We do need consultants need to be involved, very much involved, but it does need that informed client as well. The client, has to have a knowledge of what he wants to do. And he
exactly.
Needs, he has to guide them. I mean, you talked about ETCS level 2. I mean, that's another different story in Australia in terms of interoperability and the systems. That's a whole different conversation for another day. But
I really don't understand. Yeah, I heard when I came to this country, I was told the high speed line topic has already raised for over 30 years or 20 years in Australia. Yeah. But so far we haven't seen any application.
I think the important thing is, just a quick one, Frank. I think the biggest thing is, you're right. We have been talking for a long, long time about this, but the time has changed, and I think the mood has changed, where we stop talking and we start doing. And I did see something in the chat, and it did make me smile about Utopia, because I recall those Utopia episodes as well. I think we're moved on. The time is now to move on from that, and I think there is some reality in terms of a genuine need, and we're not the same as China. We're a different type of country. We're not the same as Europe, but we have a need, and we have to make sure that as clients we understand what it is we want, what we're trying to achieve, and then we use the expertise that sit in the consultants to get us to that point.
Hi, it's Dr. Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry, and I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share, and until next time, keep it simple, and bye for now. Thank you for listening.